Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Toledo. Today we'll have another great meeting and program with Jim Roby. But before we get started, I'd like to ask past President Chuck Mann to come up and deliver a reflection, and then have Molly Zrake lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
A few, actually 10, fast quotes about labor. A mind always employed is always happy. That is the true secret, the grand recipe for felicity. That's Thomas Jefferson. Here's a proverb: a hand that's dirty with honest labor is fit to shake with any neighbor. If you want to kill time, try working it to death. That's Sam Levinson. To labor is to pray is the motto of the Benedictines. A lot of what passes for depression these days is nothing more than a body saying it needs work. Labor was the first price, the original purchase, money that was paid for all things. It was not by gold or by silver, but by labor that all the wealth of the world was originally purchased. That's a quote from Adam Smith. Will Rogers said, "What the country needs is dirtier fingernails and cleaner minds." A quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln, but we're not sure that he wrote it: "Chop your own wood and it will warm you twice." From Thomas Edison, "As a cure for worrying, work is better than whiskey." And from Richard Cumberland, "It's better to wear out than rust out." Please bow your heads. Lord, we pray for all who shoulder the tasks of human labor in the marketplace, in factories and offices, in their professions, and in family living. May those of us who are now retired always remember that we can still make a valuable contribution to our world by our prayers and deeds of charity. We thank you every morning when we get up that we have something to do that day which must be done, whether we like it or not. Amen.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Chuck and Molly. As we begin our meeting today, I'd like to thank and acknowledge SSOE, this month's sponsor. We do not have any visiting Rotarians today, but if you have another guest you would like to introduce, would you please come to the floor mic and so we can see you and your guest.
President Dick, hi. I have Matt Rubin from Crane Development. He's developed the Fallen Fodder building downtown, and he has another one across the street from Shoe Loop. This is Matt. Also joining us today is Bruce Rump, CEO and President of Job One USA and Rump Development Corporation.
Welcome to both of you. And I have a guest today, David Theis, who's an Assistant Vice President and Wealth Management Advisor at Fifth Third Bank, and we're happy to have David with us today. One more.
Mr. President, I have Annalisa Greta-Fay from the Community Foundation.
Welcome.
Hi, Mr. President. We have Megan Hornsby, which is Aubrey's wife. She works at Hornsby Real Estate Company.
Nice to have all of you here. We hope you enjoyed today's program. Thanks for coming. Now would be a great time to check into social media to let everyone know you're at the Rotary Club of Toledo Monday meeting. And then I ask that you please turn off your cell phones to enjoy the rest of our program. A few announcements here. We had a wonderful trip this past Thursday and Friday to Rotary International. And we had, in Evanston, Illinois, we had 23 Rotarians, most from our club, but also 6 or 7 from the Maumee Club and the president of the Bowling Green Club. Also District Governor Maris Brenner and our youth change student, Manuel Carriego, was there also. And we enjoyed some great fellowship. We had the distinct pleasure of running into the Rotary International President, Barry Rassin, who just happened to be in the building. That's a shot of me and Mommy President Michelle Free with Barry. It was a wonderful opportunity. And another shot with Corey Hyatt, the president of Bowling Green Club, and Maris Brenner, our district governor. And there's a shot of the whole group in front of the flags at Rotary International. We spent the day on Friday in meetings talking about topics such as World Polio, membership, young leader engagement, and education. And it was just a great event, and I urge you all, if you have the opportunity to go to Rotary International, please do so. Reminder about Rotary Kids Day coming up this Saturday, October 27th at Middle Grounds Metro Park, 9 to 11:30 a.m. Grades kindergarten through 4 are the target. It's $5 registration per student. You can register right there where it says on the screen. There's an Eventbrite sign-up. It should be a great day. We're looking at water education, the importance of clean water, and it's a great family event. So if you can please register online. If you don't have the opportunity to register online, if you could let me know or let Kathy know that you plan to attend and how many children would be there. This is a group effort of all the local Rotary clubs, and everyone's participating from the various 8 or 9 Rotary clubs in the area. Reminder about this Thursday, October 25th, the new member orientation. If you're a new member, have not been to one of our orientations, I would like to invite you. Your spouse or significant other also invited. It'll be at the Manikin Smith Group, 1800 Indian Wood Circle, starting at 5 p.m. this Thursday, October 25th. Cocktails and appetizers will be provided. It's very informative and nice social time. Finally, our executive director asked me to remind everybody about Euchre this Friday, and it's at 7 p.m. The location is in the Spoke and should be online on the website, so if you're interested, please contact Kathy Tate about joining us for Euchre this Friday at 7 p.m. At this time, I'd like to invite Kurt Church, the chairman of the Vocational Service Committee, to give us an update on what his committee has been working on.
Good afternoon, everyone. President Dick asked me to provide a few details about the Vocational Services Committee. The aim of these short presentations is intended to expand the club's knowledge of the numerous service projects that are happening within each committee, which most of you are aware. I want to start off with the most recent achievement of the committee, the proper vetting and recommendation of 2 grant applications, one for Wood Lane Industries and one for Unruly Arts, which were voted positively by the Foundation Advisory Board. Both groups provide meaningful activities to promote self-esteem through work for challenged individuals. These approved applications will now head to the Foundation Board for consideration of approval. Standing committee projects include the 4-way speech contest held at the club level and the district level. It is targeted to high school-aged participants from 9th grade to 12th grade. The contest focuses on our 4-way test as it applies to the individual through an original idea using facts, statistics, stories, quotations, and life examples. The second program is the individual interviews conducted with Rotarians and high school or college-age students. The aim is to pair career-oriented students with Rotarians in a similar field, highlighting the student's interest. This year, the committee moved to limit the participation to the current Interact Club at St. Francis and the renewed Rotaract Club at the University of Toledo. In addition, to attract TPS students, we have reached out to the Youth Leadership Group of Leadership Toledo. Both projects will occur in late winter, moving into spring. We look forward to your participation. Let me leave with these thoughts from the Vocational Services Committee description page found on the club website. First, dignify each Rotarian's occupation as an opportunity to serve society. And second, use your professional skills to serve a community. To quote President Dick, be the inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt, and we appreciate the great work your committee is doing. This time, I'd like to invite Aubrey Hornsby to the podium to introduce new member Katie McDougall.
Thank you, President Dick. So I am honored today to introduce Katie McDougall. Her and her husband are dear friends of our family, and like me, she is an only child, so I got that going for me. Closest thing to a sister that I have. Katie McDougall is a 2001 graduate of Clay High School. She attended BGSU, studying marketing and public relations, and was a member of the Repertory Dance Ensemble. In 2004, Katie left BGSU to attend UNLV and pursue a BA in dance education. At UNLV, Katie also received a certification with the Dance Educators of America, where she had the opportunity to study ballet curriculum under American Ballet Theater's Raymond Lukens. Katie instructed, choreographed, and ran the outreach program for the Toledo Ballet before opening her own studio, the Dance Factory, which is celebrating its 10th year in business. From 2008 to 2015, Katie spent her time away from dance designing and coordinating for Elite Events. At Elite Events, Katie received numerous Critics' Choice Awards, was featured in Bride and the Knot magazine, and became a regular face on Channel 24, showcasing the latest in party planning tips and trends. In 2015, Katie joined the board of Downtown Perrysburg, Inc., where she served as board president. She has also been the event chairman of Winterfest and the National Ice Carving Competition, the Octoboo Festival, which is this Saturday, and First Friday series. This past May, Katie began working with Dr. Michael Reese and the Alliance for Paired Kidney Donation as Director of Development. It is Katie's hope to bring organ donation awareness and education to Northwest Ohio and help catapult Toledo, Ohio to the transplant capital of the world. When she's not teaching dance or helping plan a fundraiser, especially for me, she takes wife to Brian McDougall and his mom to 5-year-old Magnolia, 2-year-old, Mara, sorry, and 6-month-old Maddox, right? 6? Okay, this got cut off, so it's not my fault. Please give a warm welcome to Katie McDougall.
Thank you, Aubrey and Katie. It's great to have you with the club. This time, I'd like to invite John Federke to the podium to present a Paul Harris Fellow to Mary Federke.
Thank you, President Dick. Mary had a birthday this month, and it wasn't a big birthday. It was really a Jack Benny birthday. And if you don't know what that means, ask Chuck Mann, and he'll be glad to explain it to you. Now, I could have been like a lot of guys and called Dave Cameron or Bor Freeman and said, help. But the truth is, Mary is the embodiment of her father, Sam Carson. And I know that from the family, she learned that it's better to give than to receive. And so I thought, what better gift for her birthday could there possibly be than the Paul Harris Fellowship, which does indeed involve a beautiful piece of jewelry, but more importantly, the opportunity to give back to Rotary, which I know means a lot to her as it does to me. So, happy birthday, Mary.
And now I'd like to invite Joe Sharp to the podium to introduce presenter Jim Roby.
Good afternoon. Today I'd like to introduce Dr. Jim Roby. He is the Director of Regional and Economic Planning Services for W.E. Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. Dr. Roby prepares insights for regional economic development organizations with a focus on the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic states. He has additionally co-authored research on a variety of national and regional issues. He received his PhD in urban studies with an emphasis on economic development and his master's degree in public administration from Levin College of Urban Affairs, Cleveland State University. He earned his bachelor's degree in sociology from Edinburgh State College. Prior to joining Upjohn, Dr. Roby held positions of Associate Vice President with Southwest Michigan First, Managing Director at Moore Partners, Inc., and Vice President of Research at Teen NEO, where he oversaw and developed economic research across 16 Northeast Ohio counties. Please welcome Dr. Roby.
Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Thanks so much for having me today. Let me say hello to some new friends I made this morning and to some old friends that are in the back of the room that are guests today. I guess I spent enough time in the Midwest, at least in the Toledo footprint, to actually know some folks here. A couple of things about me. I'm a private sector guy. As Joe mentioned, I was a site selector. And prior to graduate school, ran auto dealerships. And so that makes me a used car salesman, fast-talking academic. And so you all can have your keys and wallets back at the end of the thing. I have them in my pocket. So we'll move on here. Let me tell you a little bit about the Institute. And so I work for the W. Upjohn Institute. You may not know of the Institute, but we are a think tank in Kalamazoo. We are sort of like Brookings or the Urban Land Institute and those sorts of folks. One of the strengths of our organization is that we are entirely self-funded, although we do bring in external money through contracts. We are outside the Beltway, so people often look at us for reasons to know things because we are not inside the Beltway. I'm one of 12 PhDs on staff there. The other 11 do primarily economic development, labor force, healthcare, and administrative data research for academic publications and presentations. I, on the other hand, was in town this morning meeting with the Regional Growth Partnership. I was at their board of directors meetings. They're a client of ours that we work with closely. And so I do very applied sorts of things, from working with the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which is part of the National Institute for Standards and Technology, to on an evaluation of their programs, to working with, again, the RGP, to working on local economic development strategies. So we do a very wide range of applied things. Two caveats to anything I say today. One, the Institute is nonpartisan, and so I will not respond to any question to the best of my ability in any way that is pro or con anything that's going on from a political standpoint. And there was a second point there, and because I'm old and a geezer, I've forgotten it. So I think one of the big questions on everybody's mind, oh, by the way, I am not a macroeconomist. Many of you are probably watching certain things much more closely than I am, and so I may defer to you if there's a Q&A period, and I can keep myself out of trouble. But I think on everybody's mind is, when's the next recession coming? And if you look at the data, what you'll find is that, and this is from a peak to peak period, that we are literally out there in the longest recovery period from the last peak in modern history. Now, I'm never quite sure from economists what modern history means, but I think it's kind of, post-50s kind of a thing. But we're 130 months out, and in reality, there's very little sight going forward that something is going to happen negative. But it's important to remember that, in fact, recessions don't get old, something happens. And that something happens is there's a policy mistake, there's a change, there's some sort of global incident, and it may be domestic, it may be international, it may be a combination of those things. And at the end of my discussion, I'll leave some room for questions, but I have some thoughts on what some of those might be. If you look at this, and the blue bars are quarterly estimates of annualized gross domestic product increases, you'll see that through the past administration, we were just a little bit below 2. With this administration, a little bit above 2. In the second quarter, we were at 4.2% annualized growth. You'll see that that's probably not sustainable, and there's a number of reasons for that. There are a number of high-frequency GDP estimates out there. The one that you may like to watch but is very unreliable is the one from the Atlanta Fed. But Moody's right now, Moody's Analytics, is looking at something about a 3.8, 3.9% for Q3, the quarter that we've just finished up. So we'll see what happens, but we'll talk in a moment, and I'm going to invoke... Oh, I'm sorry. Let me also talk about job growth. And so the red line is job growth, and what we've seen is compared to a Reagan-esque recovery, the job growth has been anemic. That could be for a number of reasons. First, the last recession was both structural and cyclical. The cyclical thing we expect to grow out of. The structural thing is that people just may not be needed on jobs like they used to be, and we're starting to see that, and that is a thing that keeps me up at night, which is my last slide. I'm sorry, and I forgot to mention the forecast, the blue line forecast. That's the Philadelphia Fed Forecaster Survey of Professional Forecasters. It's about 40 groups or individuals that are regularly surveyed. They're looking at about 2.5 to 2.8% growth going into the next year. On the employment side, we continue to see flattening growth for a couple reasons, and I'll talk about those specifically about the MSA, the Toledo metropolitan area. But nationally, we look at labor force participation rates being relatively strong, and unemployment, and I sit on a panel, it's important that I name drop so you know I'm important. I sit on a panel for the Chicago Fed. And the reality is the Fed actually said they thought we were at or below full employment. And to get them to step up and say that is incredibly surprising, because every time you say, so what is full employment? They talk about a natural rate of this and that, and they never really want to put it out there. But recently I was in Chicago with the Fed there, and they said, we think we're there. And so it's a major, major milestone. So I'm sorry to do this. I know some of you may be Blue fans, maybe not Blue fans because you're Buckeye fans. I'm a Mountaineer fan. I lived in Ohio for 30 years. Sorry, I'm none of those, but I just want you to be clear. One of the forecasts that we look at is the Research Seminar in Quantitative Economics. That sort of rolls off your tongue, doesn't it? But University of Michigan has a forecasting unit that's something like 65 or 75 years old. They believe they're the oldest forecasting unit out there. And so we look a great deal at their data. They have, by the way, just to show for them if you don't mind, they have a forecasting seminar that comes up the week before Thanksgiving every year. It's a Thursday noon to Friday noon. If you get a chance to go up the road, up 23 to see it, it's well worth your time, particularly if you like to follow these things. They have the greatest folks speaking there, and that's my shilling for them. They do give me a discount on the forecast because of it. No, they don't. I'm just kidding. But the reality is that last year GDP grew at about 2.5%. Their forecast for this year is 2.9%, and their forecast for next year is 2.8%. The scary part is they expect after the shock of all the tax cuts and savings start to play out into 2020 that we'll see growth in the GDP return to about 2%, which is sort of the long-run trend that we've seen over time. Then if you look at employment growth, this year they're expecting about 1.6% employment growth and 1.5% employment growth next year. The unemployment rate is forecast for this year to be 3.9%. It's currently below that. And there are many places across the Midwest that have unemployment rates into the 2s. So that is really just the frictional type of unemployment rate. 3.5% for 2019 is the forecast. And then inflation, and inflation is important because people are sensitive, and I'll speak about this in a moment, to rising interest rates. And so it's really important that we look at the difference between nominal interest rates and real interest rates. And that growth in inflation is employment at 2.5% forecast for this year and 2.0% for next year. Why is that important? Well, it's something that the Fed watches, and when they see tight labor markets and they see inflation rates at about 2%, that's when they start to increase, usually on 25 basis points or 0.25% interest, the Fed funds rate. There's an expectation that that will occur. There could be another rate increase this year and a few rate increases next year. So a couple of interesting things are going on. We are looking at, and this is the red line I'm speaking about, consumer confidence. Consumer confidence is at one of its all-time high rates. This is in particular the Conference Board. We also monitor the University of Michigan consumer sentiment. It is also at a very high rate right now. The interesting thing is last week they diverged. So the Conference Board indicator continued to go up a little bit, while the University of Michigan consumer sentiment tended to go down. And so we're starting to see a little bit of divergence there. And are we starting to see then maybe that thing that's going to take us into a recession way too soon to be certain? But clearly consumers are very, very confident. I believe that spending is expected to be up this Christmas, although we continue to struggle between what's bricks and mortar and what's online. And then if you look at the blue bars there, that's the change in household debt. It's important to remember as you look at this that the long-run trend is down, although there are some spikes there. Why might that be? Well, a couple of reasons we're seeing the spikes. One of the major components of household debt is student loans, and we all know the concern for that. And those are periods that you might see student loans coming into play. The other part of it, and really the potential reason for the decline in it, is that another part of that, about 2/3 of household debt is in real estate, is in your home. And as we've seen, homes are slowing, sales are slowing as much because of inventory, but there has been some price appreciation. If we look at the Standard & Poor Case-Shiller Index, it's been up about 7% this year across the country, and we're seeing those experiences locally. We're finding that homes in the 100,000 to 300,000 market are selling well, but across the country, certainly not California in those very expensive markets, but in many Midwestern markets, once you get above 300,000, 400,000, and I may get some pushback from the realtors in here, but I'd love to hear what you have to say, we're starting to see some slowness in those markets. So we look at the trends here, and we see that for a really long time, excuse the bad grammar, but it just seems to work here, you see that the Fed funds rate, the thing that drives interest rates, was close to zero for a number of years. What we've seen since 2016 is a series of increases as the Fed tries to bring interest rates back to normal. Part of the concern that we have is, and if my boss here is the president of the Institute would say, that the tax cuts were ill-timed because that could be something used in the middle of a recession to help spur things, that we may have overheated the economy. I'm not sure I completely agree with him, but also it's necessary to get interest rates back up for a couple reasons. We need to get them to normal, which is a couple points above inflation. Remember, we talked about 2% inflation. And so the possible target is about 4% in nominal rates, 2% in real rates. Another reason that it's important is that this is where fixed incomes come from, and so many people who bought fixed income assets for 30 years in 1985 at 10% had great incomes, and then all of a sudden they went from 10% to nothing. And so it really did hurt, particularly senior citizens and others. And the other thing is ultimately one way that the Fed can spur growth in a situation of a recession or something like that is the ability to reduce rates to incent people to borrow and to engage in capital expenditures. The reality is that at 4%, it probably isn't going to affect either the business consumer or the retail client. We've seen auto rates get up to into the 4s and some house rates in the long run getting into that area. But I'm not certain that we're there yet, that it's really going to be an economist for a moment. The price elasticity is going to force people out of the market. This one does have me a little bit more concerned, and this is particularly important in the Toledo footprint. Those blue bars are the annualized units on a monthly basis for sales of light vehicles. What light vehicles are anymore is a bit confusing. We see that Ford has exited the auto market, at least from the car perspective. So light vehicles include autos, CUVs, SUVs, XUVs, and light trucks. And what we've seen is a long-run peak of about 17.6, 17.7. This doesn't reflect the September number, which was 17.2 or 17.3 million units. That was based in the outcomes of the hurricanes and the damages there. That was an anomaly, but we're really starting to look back to a more normal trend of about 16.8 million, 16.7 million units. Why is that important? As you look at this ramp up, we saw a lot of capital investment in new plants, new equipment, and those sorts of things. Now we're going to see probably more stay in place, some rejiggering of contracts, and the redistribution of manufacturing across the footprint. So moving on to Ohio. Ohio's done really well. Sorry for that bad grammar again, but it just really has been great. If you look, and the size of the bubbles are the size of the industry in Ohio. So if you look at Ohio, they've added 12,000 manufacturing jobs. If you were going to ask me to forecast that type of growth, I would tell you that I didn't think it was possible, and I'll tell you why in a few moments. The couple negatives on there are sort of flatlining of educational services. That's both public sector employment as well as colleges, universities, and private sector folks. And if you look at the info there, don't be alarmed by that. That's not IT. Embedded in there are IT companies, but it's important to remember that IT is embedded in every industry. So whether you're in financial services, legal, manufacturing, healthcare, education, or anything else, you have IT there. So that's not IT occupations. That's information as a job, as an industry. And so included in that would be things like internet publishing, book publishing, DVD publishing, and those sorts of things. And so that's where they've really taken just a small hit. The one that's maybe the most interesting is that large bubble that's retail. We've actually grown retail jobs. I guess I can't say we anymore because I live in Michigan, but after 30 years in Ohio, we have grown jobs in retail at a time when everybody thinks that bricks and mortar is going away. What we're really finding is that C and D types of malls are going away, but the fact is specialized retail, value-added retail, and other things are still very, very popular. So a lot of people are concerned about tariffs these days, and I certainly am, and I'm not certain I'd label this a trade war, but we are certainly in an interesting situation here. And so as you look at this, you have about a $50 billion export economy in Ohio. By comparison, Michigan's about $59 billion, so you're pretty much on par there. And if you look, the red ones are your major trading partners as a share of all exports by different categories. So not surprisingly, transportation equipment, a major portion of that goes to Canada. In fact, a major portion of all exports go to Canada. We look at chemicals, most of that goes to Canada. Michigan, by comparison, is a reference group because you are so influenced with the synergies between Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan. Most of their chemicals go to the commodity chemicals go to the EU. But as you look down this list, the interesting one gets to be around agricultural products. And so this is where tariffs are particularly important. And the relationship with the creation of the USMCA, another one that just rolls off your tongue, doesn't it? If this actually gets enacted by all of the legislatures in all three countries, we have a trading bloc situation that's very, very amenable, and it's something we're really looking forward to. But we still need to think about those bilateral trade agreements, particularly with China. And when we look at particularly soybeans and other things coming out of Ohio, those are major trading partners. We were, a number of us here today were at the Regional Growth Partnership meeting this morning, and they were announcing that down in North Baltimore that they're building, expanding upon the CSX intermodal and the ability to put ag products into containers and move them internationally. And one of those things would be filling auto parts that are coming in from offshore and putting them back with soybeans and those sorts of ag products, not the huge commodities like wheat and those sorts of things, but high value add like soybeans going back into Asia. So that's maybe the one that should be concerning to Ohio farmers. And with farmers come implement dealers and repairers and small towns. And so this is probably important because 30-some% of ag exports out of Ohio go directly to China. So what's going on in Toledo? And I'm running out of time, so I'll get through this. Labor markets are relatively tight. If you look at that red square there, or sort of red rectangle, that's Lorain County, and that's in the 5.5%. If I was standing in front of you a year ago, I would have told you that 5.5% is probably full employment. And so what we see as we look across the footprint, including up into Southwest Michigan, is Northwest Ohio is nearly completely at full employment. So that's good on one hand because it means there's jobs for people. That makes it very difficult to expand the economy, to grow the economy, to attract new business. Makes RGP's job very, very difficult, as well as all the economic developers in each of these counties and the economic development departments in the city of Toledo. Along with that, the other thing that we look at is not just the unemployment rate, because remember the U3 unemployment rate is the rate of people who are in the labor force but who are actively looking for work. The other thing that we look at is labor force participation rates, and those are incredibly important from the standpoint that the U.S. rate is currently about 62.7%, meaning that everybody 15 and older, and that includes me as a geezer, is out in the job market working. So about 2 out of 3 people in the U.S. are either looking for work or active. But when we look at across this footprint, the dark blue ones are the very tight labor markets where there's lots of people working, but there are some capacities there. That's important to recognize because it creates an opportunity for us to, with the right pay plan and the right benefits, to bring more people into the workforce. So when we look at what's happened to groups, so if you look at the previous, so if you look at the blue bars on the left and then go to the next one over on the right, you'll see that we're losing people in different age brackets. So you see that each year the blue bar, and then you go to the next set of bars and you look at the red bar, you'll see that they're declining. So what's happening is people are either leaving the workforce or they're migrating out, and net migration is not bringing them back in. And this is a concern. This is a danger to the region because we need to have folks that are able to work. We see incomes going up between 2006 and 2016. This is a good thing. So what are our thoughts on the next recession? And then I'll wrap up and see if you have any questions. We're uncertain about the effect of announced tariffs. We seem to be growing in the right direction with Canada and Mexico, with the USMCA. I want to do that YMCA thing every time, sorry. So we seem to be going in the right direction there, which they are our major trading partners, both on a bilateral basis, moving goods back and forth across. And it seems that some of the things like the dairy and some of the ag stuff and other things seem to have been worked out. The EU was on track, now seems to be a bit of a problem, but they have their own issues to deal with, particularly with the Brexit and whether the UK will exit or not. The one that's maybe most troubling, but maybe not troubling when you look at the fact that you export very little to China, is the cost of bringing things in. The important thing about the USMCA is that it does not cover steel and aluminum tariffs. That's not part of it. The future role of these agreements, so we work with blocs like Canada and Mexico, we work with blocs like the EU, but the bilateral trade agreements, if you look at the Center for Automotive Research, the work that they've done, they continue to cite that the reason historically that Mexico has gotten a lot of final assembly plants is they just have better bilateral trade agreements, and it's cheaper to export out of Mexico vehicles into the Pacific Rim than it is to export out of the U.S. Expected interest rates are going to continue to increase. They'll probably increase in 25 basis points or 0.25%. That's going to happen over probably 4 or 5 more times over the next couple of years, assuming we don't go into a recession. Again, tight labor markets, that's the U3. Even the U6, which is a disadvantaged, disassociated workers and those sorts of things, they seem to be coming down. And then maybe the thing that starts to concern me is this movement from Industry 2.0, which is very manual labor, to Industry 3.0, which uses a combination of digitalization or automation, to Industry 4.0, which is the Internet of Things, digitalization, automation, and other things, and what the potential impact of that will be. And my final slide, actually not really, the changing face of economic development. We've just finished a project for First Energy across their 5-state footprint, and what we've seen is since the recession that the level of capital investment per worker is going up significantly. Labor theory would say the more you're spending on capital, the more expecting a return, which means that we believe, and we're working with RGP and others across the footprint to understand that most likely we're going to be looking for smarter, more talented workers to fill positions. The production function equation, we see the fight for 15 and other things, and again, nonpartisan, just simple economics is the more you increase the price of labor, the production function equation in economics will say that as labor gets more expensive, particularly when you can't get it in tight labor markets, you'll start to see technology replacing those workers. I was recently in Paris, and if you go on the Champs-Élysées to McDonald's, there's no workers to take your order. There's only kiosks. This is coming here. Middle skilled job, those are folks that have some sort of post-secondary training but pre-baccalaureate. Again, with this capital investment, we think that that's the future of jobs, as probably most people do not do. I put my arm around my son and said, get a trade. He's a really brilliant kid, but get a trade. You don't, college may not be what you're looking for. Artificial intelligence, and I've not got this here, but Warren Buffett talked about it. So everybody thinks that there'll be other jobs. If they're not in manufacturing, they'll be in services. Warren Buffett owns Geico. He has 33,000 people there, and everybody knows the Geico gecko. He says that with AI, they can reduce the 33,000 to 10,000. So this is all going in the wrong direction, in my opinion. There are other people that disagree with that. And then finally, everybody deserves a life. And so we've talked about, and Bill Gates and others have talked about universal basic income, that there's a minimum. There's some trials in Sweden and other places about this. We'll see what happens. The question is, how do you pay for it? So how do we currently pay for things in our society? We have income tax, we have property tax, we have sales tax. What happens when people are no longer in the productive section of the workforce and can no longer consume? And let me just sum it up, and you won't be able to read this, but this says, and I probably can't read it either, but it essentially says, hey, we produce millions of units in our West Michigan factory. Who says we don't manufacture these things anymore? Our West Michigan factory produces thousands of units per hour, and it keeps our 7 employees busy. So the reality is, this stuff is coming, and what we're going to do with labor in the future, while it's tight now, who knows? Thanks so much.
See if there's any questions. Does anyone have a question for Jim?
No hard questions.
I hope it's an easy question. You hear a lot, and I don't know from where, but it just seems to be a general sense that wages are stagnant. And while the Chicago Fed may say that employment is where it needs to be, what's the real story on wages, and how does that factor into your outlook?
Well, you ask a really good question. So my concern is that people have reservation wages. And when I used to teach economics to graduate students, I'd ask how many would work in my barn for $5 an hour shoveling, and no hands went up. And I said, how many would work for $100 an hour? Lots of hands went up. And so we would work our way down. And so there's a reservation wage. And so what happens is when you look at labor force participation rates, and that's the thing that I really watch closely, that most people who are in the market at the current wages. You ask a great question. Wages have been going up about 2.5% to 3% a year. But the reality is with inflation at 2%, we're not really seeing real wage growth. And so we're not inducing people into the market. It's not all of a sudden, well, you know, I could make $15, but now I can make $20. It's, well, I could make 15, but now I can make 16. And so this is a concern. How we get GDP growth without workers is we use machines, and we haven't figured out how to tax machines yet, and we probably need to figure that out.
Thank you for your presentation. My question revolves around labor participation rate. What's the denominator? What comprises the denominator for that equation? What kind of, who's in that?
Everybody 15 and over. So that includes 60-year-olds, 85-year-olds. So it's a combined. There's another one that we look at, which is population to employment sometimes, and we'll cut that off at 55 or 65, and sometimes, but the labor force participation rate, as if you looked it up on the website and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's 16 and over.
Okay, I think we're done.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, for today's great program. To show our appreciation, the Toledo Rotary Club Foundation will present a donation to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund in your name, and we want to present you with this book on Toledo's history.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Well, I have your attention. Please note that next week's meeting will not be here at the Park Inn. We'll be at the Aquarium at the Huntington Center. And our speaker will be Rotarian Dave Zenk, the Executive Director of Metro Parks Toledo. So please go to the aquarium, not here, although parking, I believe, Kathy, will still be available here, and we'll have parking passes at the aquarium for you when you come back to get your car. Immediately following today's program, the nominating committee will be meeting in the North Cape Room. Katie, welcome again to Toledo Rotary, and Aubrey, thank you for bringing Katie to our club. Mary, again, congratulations on your Paul Harris Fellow. And now, center stage, past President Chuck Mann.
A quick story and then a few one-liners. We've been blessed with 4.6 grandchildren, and two of them were over the other night, and they being the youngest being Abby and Emma. Emma is 3 years old. We have Alexa in the room next to where we eat. Does everybody know who Alexa or what Alexa is? Okay. So the girls get great fun. Alexa plays music for the girls, and you always say kids music because you never know what you're going to get in case you forget that. But we had finished eating and we were cleaning up supper. And Abby said, "Alexa, tell a kid's joke." So Alexa said, "Why did the chicken cross the road to get to the other side?" At that point, her mom said, "Alexa, tell another kid's joke." Emma said, "Yeah, and make it funnier this time." It's going to be a wild ride. It's a shame that nothing is built in America anymore. I just bought a TV that said built-in antenna, and I don't even know where that is. What did our parents do to kill boredom before the internet? I asked my 26 brothers and sisters, and they don't know either. I told my wife she was drawing her eyebrows too high. She looked at me surprised. A man tells his doctor, "Doc, help me. I'm addicted to Twitter." The doctor replies, "Sorry, I don't follow you." And I've asked more than 100 women what type of soap they prefer in the shower. The most common answer is, "How the hell did you get in here?"
Thank you, Chuck. Remember, let's be servants out there so we can be the inspiration. Have a great week. We are adjourned. Thank you.